Thank you. Good morning, everyone, to this, and I welcome you to this very exciting webinar by SLEvA and APEA. It's webinar number 37, organized by SLEvA, APEA, EvalVision Consortium of Institutions on M&E Education, EvalYouth Sri Lanka, and Center for Evaluation, University of Sri Jayewardenepura. The topic for today's webinar is localizing M&E education in the Asia Pacific region. And this is a pretty important topic because we will be focusing on enhancing usability of M&E systems by localizing them so that the people are at the very bottom level are able to use the M&E system. So basically, it's not only about the building capacity of the people at the bottom level, but also giving them power to make decisions. So in this context, we have this webinar, and I hope that everybody will enjoy and get benefited out of the discussion that we are going to have. Now we have, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. This is me. I'm Shyam, and I am part of the APEA, and I'm co-chairing the Consortium of Institutions on M&E Education in the Asia. I will be chairing this session today. Thank you. Let's just go through the agenda. Okay, few reminders. Please keep your microphones and video disabled mode. For questions and concern, please write them in the chat bar. So let's go through the agenda briefly. It is 1 hour, the discussion. So we will begin with the opening remark by Professor Yoko. We will have a presentation by the study team on M&E course curriculum study that we have done. We have reviewed the course curriculum across the world. Then there will be question answer on the study. And after that, we will invite the panelists. We have 3 panelists to discuss on M&E education in the Asia Pacific region, and they will be discussing, the context where they are coming from, and also some of the questions that we will pose. This will be followed up by 20-minute discussion where people can ask questions to panel members, and then there'll be closing remarks by Mr. Aniruddha Brahmachari. Let's start. So let me introduce Professor Yoko Ishida. She's a professor at Hiroshima University and Vice President of Japan Evaluation Society. Professor Yoko, please begin with your opening remark.
Thank you, Shyam-san. So good morning and good afternoon to all our participants. Welcome to the 37th SLEvA webinar titled Localizing M&E Education in the Asia Pacific region. We are very pleased that you are here today with us. So I am Yoko Ishida, professor at Hiroshima University, as well as Vice President of Japan Evaluation Society. In the past 2 weeks, we were excited about the good result of Japan's football team beyond our expectation at the FIFA World Cup 2022, and now suffering from the lack of sleep. So then, thank you again for all of you being with us today. I feel very honored to deliver welcome remarks at the beginning of this webinar. The overall goal of the Asia Pacific Regional Evaluation Strategy is to realize greater use of evaluation contributing positively to achievement of National Development Goals and SDGs in the Asia Pacific region, professionalizing evaluation, promoting young and emerging evaluators, strengthening both are among the key actions of the strategy. For promoting these key actions, it is really important to localize M&E education in the Asia Pacific region, as in the title of this webinar. As you might know already, the Asia Pacific Consortium conducted the M&E course needs assessment study last year, and the consortium is now conducting a review of M&E curriculum from various academic institutes from various countries. Based on the process and the findings, A report is now being finalized. At the same time, the consortium has begun to develop course curriculum, which will be used by the Asia Pacific countries. So as in the agenda, the progress of the consortium course curriculum study and the outline of the M&E education in our region are to be presented. I am sure the presentations and discussions during the webinar will contribute to the improvement of the output of the consortium study. Now, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Please have useful learning and discussions through the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Yoko. Thank you very much. Let's move to the next agenda. And here is the presentation on the M&E course curriculum study by Tashi. Tashi is the board member APEA, and he is the co-leader EvalYouth Bhutan. And in the team, we have Ugyen, who's a core member of EvalYouth Bhutan, and Dr. Suraj Jacob, who's the visiting faculty at Azim Premji University, Bangalore, India. So Tashi, please go ahead with the presentation.
Is my presentation visible?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Dr. Shyam, and very good morning to all the participants here. I, on behalf of volunteers from EvalYouth Bhutan, would like to, on the very outset, thank the consortium team and APEA for giving us this very important opportunity to contribute in the study. We are 4 in the team. We have our members from EvalYouth Bhutan, Mr. Tseltem Tharchen, Tashi Ugyen Lhamo, and myself. And so it has been a very good opportunity for us to learn as we scan through the existing M&E programs across the world through this engagement. And so again, and I'll be briefly presenting what and how we carried out the preliminary text research of the existing M&E programs and some reviews of the programs. Yeah, so basically we were assigned 2 tasks. First, the landscaping of the M&E education program in programs. So where we were assigned to carry out text research on existing M&E programs which are being offered across the world in order to understand its distribution and nature. And second task that we were assigned was to look at the program reviews of M&E, where we looked at the literatures on M&E programs or M&E program reviews. Just to take you through how we approach this preliminary study to present the methodology of the assignment. First, we did text research on existing M&E programs, where we tried to look at the level of the programs being offered in across the universities. Some were at the certificate level, some were diploma, some were undergrad, postgrad, masters, and even PhD in some cases. And we also looked at the length of the programs. Some were very short-term programs, which lasted from 3 to 6 months, and some were as long as 2 years for the master's program. And second, we also did scanning of the program overview to understand the contents, which varies from one university to another. So the contents were very interesting and then relevant. And the third thing, we did a literature search on M&E program reviews in order to understand the status, effectiveness, and progress of the program. So these literature reviews on the program, these program reviews help us in identifying future directions, the needs and priorities of the program. So we feel that this is very important as our consortium as we start designing the programs which is specific and relevant to our Asia Pacific region. So we can learn from these program reviews and then incorporate those directions, needs, and priorities given in the program reviews. So these are, this is how we approached during our preliminary text research on the M&E programs and the program reviews. So next, again, we'll be taking us through some of the examples of how we did our assignment. Over to you again.
Thank you, Tashi. So out of the 26 M&E programs that we found, we've highlighted some of them here in the presentation to provide an overview of what these programs are providing. As Tashi mentioned, these programs ranged from levels, as shown here. There were some certificate courses provided in the University of Minnesota to master's and even PhD programs. And these courses were either for 9 months or a year. And there were also some that range from 3 to 5 years. We also did a deep dive on the evaluation courses and found that while some only focused on the foundational evaluation theory, others were more focused on monitoring and evaluation in policy management itself. Can you please go to the next slide? Tashi? Thank you. So we've also referenced 17 different literatures studying the state, the effectiveness, and the progress of the programs. We found that some identified future direction and what was required from these. So out of these 17 different literatures, we mentioned some in the presentation as well. And thank you. And out of these, so one such example is the evaluation education in South Africa. This study talked about the characteristics and challenges in the changing world. So this article was guided by the following questions. What is the state of the formal evaluation education offerings in South Africa? They also talked about what the main drivers of change in the current global and local evaluation context was, and in what ways the South African evaluation education could respond to the dynamic social context in which evaluators operate. There were also some literature reviews that talk about how monitoring and evaluation training was also important in order to understand how to conduct the monitoring and evaluation in our own spaces. So these are just a brief overview of what we have conducted. So that is the end of our part of the presentation, and I would like to hand it over to Dr. Suraj now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tashi and Ugyen. I will just continue and elaborate on some of the things that Tashi and Ugyen already mentioned. So as they said, the Bhutan team undertook this labor-intensive effort of really looking at what are the existing evaluation education programs. And so here are some of the things which have emerged from what they've found, as well as Tashi and Ugyen mentioned, our review. There's been a lot of reviews of existing programs as well. So what are the learnings so far? And the hope is that these learnings will help us when we think of the Asian, different parts of the Asian region, how to think of localizing evaluation education. There's a lot in the literature in these existing evaluation programs about the purpose of evaluation education. Much of it is fairly straightforward. What I've highlighted in purple here, of course, evaluation education is to create knowledge, create attitudes and a culture of evaluation, as well as, of course, link with practice and practitioners. Many of the programs mentioned this kind of double challenge, which is mentioned at the end of the slide, which is on the one hand, to create a bundle of specific competences for specific clients, but on the other hand, to be pretty broad. So there's always this tension, I think, in many of these programs between how specific do you want to get and how general do you want it to be. And so that's something that we need to consider for when we think of evaluation education programs of the Asian region. this kind of balance between the specific and the general competences. In fact, it may not surprise you to know that it's hard to actually define what an evaluation education program is. I've put down some definitions which have occurred in the literature from the 80s to the 90s. And what seems to be kind of a more standard way of looking at it, especially in the American evaluation education programs, is what is put in purple at the end of this slide, which is they define an evaluation education program to be one with 2 or more courses with the term evaluation in the title as a proxy for the courses largely being about evaluation as content. But this is again something maybe we can come back to in discussion, which is what are the contours of a program, right? And I think as Tashi mentioned a little while earlier, we have programs of all kinds of lengths, short and long, diploma programs, master's programs, even doctoral programs. So what constitutes a program for evaluation education is not something which is settled in the global literature. In terms of the number and geographical spread of evaluation education programs, again, precisely because we don't have a good definition, consensual definition of what's a program. In fact, lots of different studies come up with different counts as to the number of evaluation education programs. Our own draft report has looked at 25 odd programs. Studies from the US suggest that the US has little less than 100, 80, 90 universities running programs. And outside the US, there are pockets. So by far, the majority of evaluation education programs occur in the United States. Outside that, there are pockets in Europe, then in Canada, Australia, a few in Latin America, and increasingly several in Africa. I just want to draw your attention to the material in purple on this slide, which is Asia is conspicuously missing in most global surveys. And so this is something which this particular consortium is specifically designed to address. Many past reports suggest that there's been an increase in the number of evaluation education programs, especially in the last 15 years, and that dovetails with, for example, the MDG, SDG agenda, and many new global agendas and donor requirements. But the point is that evaluation education programs have really taken off, for example, in Africa in the last 10-15 years. And the other interesting thing is that the departmental location of many of these programs and universities varies considerably. So there are programs in education, in health sciences, in management studies programs, in sociology. And so that's again something to think about. So for example, many of the programs in Africa, I think, are located more in health sciences departments. Many in the US are located in education departments and so on. So the departmental location of programs also varies. In short, we don't have a good sense of the number of global programs at work because it's hard to survey these things and because definitions are unclear. But what is very clear is that Asia is conspicuously missing. Even if you take out the United States programs, even outside the United States, you have some in Latin America, Africa, and so on, and Europe, of course, but far, far fewer in Asia. I'll call your attention to one particular report from South Africa that Ugyen also mentioned, which actually took a deep dive into the evaluation education landscape in South Africa. I've just listed the main study and a follow-up study in blue at the bottom of this slide. And that's worth looking at later for us from an Asian perspective, because they look at kind of from a countrywide perspective, and they look at all of South Africa's universities, and they find that there are 55 evaluation programs, of which 8 are separate postgraduate programs. So, and they have located in different departments, as I said earlier, health, management sciences, and so on. But except for this, we could not find any kind of countrywide systematic study of evaluation education. So the South Africa study is particularly valuable. In that South Africa study, they have this very interesting kind of generic a diagram of what they call the supply and demand drivers of evaluation education. So I've just reproduced that diagram on this slide. And what's interesting is to note that from a demand perspective, the Sustainable Development Agenda, especially from an African perspective, that's been a big driver of the demand for evaluation education and international donors and philanthropy, and increasingly national governments. And from a supply perspective of evaluation education, they talk about the difficulties and the challenges in creating a pool of formally trained evaluators and the professionalization of evaluation. Many African countries now have national evaluation associations, something like 30 or upwards of 30 such associations. So this is a useful general framework of talking about the demand side for evaluation education and the supply side of evaluation education. Of course, a lot of our discussion is understandably about the supply side, but I think this diagram is a useful reminder of how the two come together to determine the evaluation education landscape. Interestingly, there is no consensus in the US literature, in the European literature, and so on, regarding what is an appropriate evaluation education program. Of course, there are pointers which we, from the Asian perspective, should build on to. But what I've highlighted here, even after several decades, a recent article concludes there is no answer to the question of what constitutes an adequate evaluation training program. This is interesting, for sure. And we see a lot of variation in what different evaluation education curricula focus on. I'll come back to this if there is interest later, but I'm just going to skip this. There is an increasing tendency that many of us who are involved in evaluation education know, which is the tendency to emphasize quantitative and skill-based approaches. And often that's at the cost of the kinds of things that I've highlighted in purple on this slide: needs assessment, basic and advanced qualitative inquiry, visual storytelling, and so on, which ought to belong in evaluation education. But increasingly, especially in the last few years, many of the evaluation education programs are a little more along the lines of experimental RCT or quasi-experimental, statistically based ways of doing impact evaluation. The other thing which often does not get adequate recognition in many of these evaluation education programs is the discussion of professional issues, what it means to be a good evaluator. So interpersonal skills, dispositions, and so on. So those are the bits that I've highlighted in purple on this slide. One of the things that our survey of global evaluation education programs shows is the emphasis on practice. Very understandable. Evaluation is a very practice-oriented field. And so there's a lot of discussion on the different kinds of field projects, internships, practicums, and so on, which are available, and how these contribute to creating a well-rounded evaluator in the program. And there was even an instance in the United States of an almost entirely field-oriented evaluation program with very little kind of classroom component, which is the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation program, on which there has been a study.
Dr. Suraj, please conclude.
Yeah, thanks. So let me just make the final point then, thanks Shyam, is that especially in the African literature, people are now talking about contextualizing evaluation education, in this case to Africa. So there is something they're calling MAE, Made in Africa Evaluation, to talk about evaluation education rooted in African cultures, in development philosophies of the region, and so on. So that I think is of particular value for us from an Asian perspective. So the challenges of evaluation are especially from a supply side, getting programs running, having the space, having the staffing, having the infrastructure and the facilitation to actually construct these programs. It is, of course, something that we can learn from some of these longer running programs in the US, Europe, and even now in Africa. With that, let me end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suraj and team. Thank you very much for this very important presentation. And I think when most of the countries in Asian region are ushering into the era where we need these programs, I think the study like this will definitely benefit the institutions and scholars who wants to initiate such programs. So thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And let me now invite the questions. We have around 8 minutes. If there are questions, there's one question already in the chat box. Dr. Suraj, if you can take up, the question reads, could you elaborate about the purpose of evaluation education program? Is it linked to the training of an evaluative thinking, which is evidence-based triangulation of courses, system thinking, etc.? Dr. Suraj.
Yeah, it's I think this is a question from Carlos. I'm just reading it. I think this is a very important question. As one of my slides suggested, even in the literature, which looks back on existing evaluation education programs, there is no consensus on what the purpose is, which is interesting. The kinds of purposes which are mentioned in different bits of this literature kind of span the things that Carlos, I think you've mentioned in your chat box question. So of course, at one level, it is about professionalizing evaluation and creating ready-made evaluators who can actually start evaluation work. But it is not limited to simply producing practitioners, because there's part of the literature also talks about the need for dispositions of an evaluation culture, on which I think there have been past webinars in the series as well. So it is partly the training, but also evaluative thinking, and that evaluation culture would extend to donors, to governments, to civil society organizations, and so on. So it's a combination of the things that Carlos has mentioned in his question.
Thank you, Dr. Suraj. There's one more comment. I think I'm not sure if this is question. Your assessment as to the use of evaluation competency framework in deciding curriculum in universities.
Yeah, I think this question is from Romeshan. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I think I don't think our survey has too much to say about this. What we did see is that there are some studies, particularly of the US, where there's a lot of emphasis on now competencies and listing out competencies and creation of frameworks, for example, of the American Evaluation Association. What is interesting is that evaluation programs in the US don't necessarily map those competencies, partly because these competencies have changed and are a little on the new side. And that's one of the kind of live debates in this literature, which is to what extent, for example, when the University of Minnesota recently redesigned its evaluation program, and that's one of the older evaluation education programs in the US, stretching back several decades. This was one of the debates they had. To what extent do we bring in competency frameworks? And from what I understand, there is no clear kind of conclusion about it. And I think that's true for other evaluation education programs as well. So competencies are kind of created by the practitioners in their associations, but the mapping or the coordination with evaluation programs, I think, is loose. Whether or not that's a good thing is a different matter, but I think that's the reality.
Thank you. Let's take two last questions. One from Mongolian Evaluation Association. When you say that there is no evaluation education in Asia, is it exclusively for degree programs, or you are referring for the short-term course in certificate program?
Yeah. And to clarify, as I said earlier, it is hard to define what an evaluation education program is. So there are very short-term programs, certificate programs, and so on. But if you go by kind of one of the definitions I gave earlier, which is at least 2 courses with evaluation in their title, it suggests something little longer term. And most of these courses are about a year or more in length. that we are talking about. Then there are very few in Asia. Of course, there are much shorter kind of weekend workshops or a few weeks long kind of programs. But that's kind of, we are taking those kinds of programs out to look for slightly longer and fuller programs. Yes.
Thank you. So last two questions, no more now, because so we can combine two questions from Alex and Julius. I mean, basically the question is about whether you have got any program that is based on the community-led evaluation or the more practical, the making program more practical, meaning involving local people, decision making, etc.
Yes. So we've not come across any program which is explicitly and completely about community-led evaluation as an entire program. We do see courses, elective courses, for example, offered in evaluation education programs where there is a community focus. And that usually happens from what we've seen, because many of the faculty in these evaluation education programs are kind of faculty who are located in other departments. And so they might, for example, a faculty member in anthropology or sociology who might teach, for example, participatory rural appraisal or other community-led initiatives for general research. They might offer a course in an evaluation program where they bring that community focus into teaching a course in an evaluation. So that's what we see more of, rather than an entire program devoted to community focus.
Thank you.
I would say that that's a gap. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Suraj. I think we can make note of it. This what Julius is suggesting, that there is a program in Kenya, so we can definitely look at it when we review.
Oh, thank you. Can I just say thank you, Julius? See, one of the things is it's hard to really put it together. So I think this is extremely helpful because most of these global surveys seem to miss many programs, partly because they depend on websites, partly because of language issues and so on. So that's thank you very much for that tip.
Thank you. Let's move to the next segment, which is the panel discussion. And just very briefly. Okay, can you mute? There's some. Okay. Very briefly, we have, we are looking at this discussion, particularly from 5 binaries. How the M&E education is theoretical or practical, whether it's a global or local, whether it's a data-oriented or people-oriented, how much of it is standardized and how much of it is allow local innovations, and whether it's a top-down and bottom-up. So a couple of questions that have been given to the panelists, and definitely they will add on. It's not just a 2 question, they can definitely bring the examples and their experience from their own context, that how can academic courses promote localized M&E education? That was one question. And second, what feasible pathways are there that could really increase the usability of such academic courses? We have 3 panelists. Let me invite first Mr. Katsuji Imata, who is a board member and the training committee chair of the Japanese Evaluation Society. Sir, you have 10 minutes, and it will be really helpful if you can conclude within 10 minutes so that we have enough time for the question answer later on. So, Mr. Katsuji, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important seminar about the theme of localizing M&E. My name is Katsuji Imata. I'm with the Japan Evaluation Society, and I'm serving as a board member and the chair of the training committee. So briefly, let me try to respond to the 2 questions that have been posed. But before that, I don't have a slides, but let me just briefly introduce what the JES, Japan Evaluation, does as far as the training and curriculum development and delivery goes. So as it may not be well known, but the Japan Evaluation Society in 2008 started its certificate program for professional evaluators. We have 3 levels, and then the first one, the introductory one, is the most popular one. And we have so far up to this year certified close to 800 professional evaluators in our system with the program which ran 30 times, about twice a year. And with the COVID, we have, there were a year or two when we didn't offer that program, but from about 2 years ago, we came back with the kind of online format with the lecturers talking in video, and then they come back in a live format online with the participants to really answer questions and all that. So there are between 15 and 17 sessions in each of the program, and like I said, we already ran this 30 times. And so with that as said, with regard to your questions, first, as far as I know, we don't, in Japan, we don't really have any master's level or postgraduate degree program around evaluation. And so I think this certificate program that JES provides is quite unique because as I will be talking about, there'll be more demand about the skills of evaluation, and that people are really coming to this certificate program. In terms of the localization, so the question is, how can we try to localize the academic courses to localize the needs? I think our response to that is the certificate program has some kind of a localization thinking built into the curriculum. What I mean by that is when it comes to localization, it's not just about localizing to specific needs of the country or the region, but at the same time, it needs to be localized to specific sectors. In Japan, there's a very, very different needs and different ways of doing evaluation between people in the public sector and people in the international development sector and people in the educational sector and all that. Those three are the most prominent fields of work that the evaluation has been particularly needed. So, from the national government to regional, local governments, people are used to doing evaluation, and they have a particular way of doing things. So we really need to tailor to the needs of those professionals who are public officials who really need to work on evaluation on a day-to-day basis. I think the same is true for consultants and international development agencies staff around evaluation, because they have a program to run. And as you may know, JICA has a special kinds of evaluation framework that is applicable to all their programming areas. And then I also mentioned the educational institutions. From the primary, secondary to a tertiary level schools and the educational institutions, evaluation is something that they have to do vis-a-vis their requirements to the government and the Ministry of Education. So again, they have a special way of doing things. So I think, our approach has been really trying to really respond to these different demands to create a uniform set of a curriculum that address the needs of different sectors when it comes to evaluation. And I also need to mention in the last few years, there is an increasing demand to learn about evaluation from the social sector and social purpose organizations, people working in the welfare system, people working in the library system, museum. So evaluation is really a hot topic across different disciplines these days. And also, last but not least, from the investment sector, the financial institutions are really in need of doing some kind of evaluation around their sustainable finance schemes and in particular impact investing. So that is happening as a new set of demands. So in response to this, I think we are trying to, of course, so we didn't really start from the vacuum. So we didn't really start from trying to really provide evaluation course with some academic rigor. Rather, our approach has been really trying to address the needs of these practitioners. But at the same time, at the training committee of JES, we have been discussing, how can we develop more consistency and coherence to our approach to evaluation in the last few years. And one of the things we have come up with is really trying to use the program evaluation framework, and that needs to be applicable to whoever the field of work that the participants are coming from. So when I say program evaluation framework, of course we are talking about we start with the needs assessment, and then we do really examine the program theory, and then we do process evaluation, outcome evaluation, and then we see the cost benefit analysis and all that, the whole cycle of program management and corresponding program evaluation requirements. Something we have started to talk about. And since this is still an introductory level, the competency level is really, raising the literacy around the program evaluation, and we are not really requiring for them to have very high-notch technical skills. So that's my response to the question number one. And since I'm going to be running out of time pretty soon, for question number two about, I think what I can say at this point is really, I think to me personally as well, to think about evaluation use is particularly important, and use by whom is also a particularly important question. So for that, for that point of view, I think we have in the training committee in trying to revamp the program, we have been focusing on different skill sets or competencies, as have been talked about by previous speakers in the program. And then, we do really need to pay attention to, of course, the hard and technical skills on the one hand, but at the same time, the soft skills are very, very important in this changing landscape globally, nationally, and locally around development, around the future of economy and sustainability and the SDGs and all that. We do really need to have people, being conscious and pay attention to these external changes. And so the soft skills will definitely include critical thinking and evaluative thinking. Also human skills and interaction skills with people who are really running different programs, and a culture and attitude, as Dr. Suraj talked about. We do really need to instill the evaluation culture within the organization that will help. And so with that in mind, we are still in constant redevelopment of the curriculum at the training committee. And we at the Japan Evaluation Society is trying to serve the purpose of really trying to enhance the evaluation capacity within the country. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Katsuji Imata. Thank you very much for bringing the context in and the practices that you are doing in your context, particularly the Evaluation Society, Japanese Evaluation Society. Let me invite the second panelist, Dr. Suraj, who is a visiting faculty at Azim Premji University, Bangalore, India. Dr. Suraj, you have 10 minutes. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Shyam. Thank you, Mr. Imata. I think just for those who did not see, Shyam has now put in the 2 questions on the chat box so that I think all of us can think think about these big questions, even as the panelists going on. Taking up something that Mr. Imata mentioned, and I'm speaking with familiarity of the Indian context, and connecting with a point that I think one of our Kenyan participants had put in the chat box about community-oriented evaluations. I think, let me start by almost being a little provocative and saying there is a danger that if we do not create evaluation education, which really speaks to our context, in the DNA of that should really speak to our context, and there is a danger that we will be picking up skills and framings which come from the West, particularly from the US, because that's where a lot of evaluation education has happened, and there's a lot we can learn from there for sure. So, I'm quite excited, even though I don't know much about this made in Africa evaluation, which I mentioned briefly in the slide. It's something I hope we can learn more about. So just by framing it like that, now Africa also may be too big, right? We might want to go into East Africa and Southern Africa and so on, but at least to say, to foreground the need for an evaluation education which speaks to some kind of at least continental context, I think is wonderful. But I think whatever I've read about that suggests that there's a lot of work to be done. I don't think that sentiment makes its way into the actual evaluation programs in Africa, whatever I've understood. And maybe our Kenyan participant can correct me, or I think there are interesting programs in Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, and so on. So to what extent is the evaluation education programs in Africa really speaking to the African context? To what extent are they general programs about needs assessment and impact evaluation and quasi-experimental techniques and so on? I mean, there's a well-developed kind of toolbox that we've got. So I just want to kind of foreground this effort and know more about it. And what does that mean for us in the Asian context? Again, it's good to talk about Asia, but Asia is too broad, right? Which parts of Asia? I'm in South Asia, but South Asia is also too diverse. Mr. Imata is in East Asia, that's diverse. So I think that the topic of the seminar, localizing, what is local then becomes a question to ask, right? How local is local? So I think I'm not proposing an answer, but I want to foreground the importance of this. So unless that is built into the DNA of an evaluation program, the danger, what I was saying was that you will basically teach existing courses tweaked a little bit, but mostly, and then add a little small layer of our own local society or country, rather than build it into the DNA. So how can we rethink is a question. And I think that should be kept in our mind, because it's easy enough and too convenient to borrow wholesale and tweak. So that's more of a kind of reminding ourselves about the need to do the made in Asia, Africa, whatever evaluation. What does that mean? One thing I can say in the recent Indian experience, which I'm a bit more familiar about, is that in India, in the last 15 or so years, there has been a welfare rights discourse. And out of that has come something called people's hearings. In some Indian languages, it's called Jan Sunwai. And the idea is that to have communities insist that they have face-to-face hearings or meetings with implementers, especially of government programs, and talk about, oh, so much money was allotted for something, what happened to it? This was promised to be done, what happened to it? Sort of community audit, community taking stock of things by sitting alongside the implementer. And often this is an uncomfortable thing because there is a hierarchy, there's a power hierarchy, and so on. So this public hearings movement, citizens hearings movement called Jan Sunwai in India, which is happening in pockets here and there over the last several years in India, is an example maybe of a made in India kind of evaluation. This is more about kind of monitoring evaluation that we are talking about here, right? We're talking about asking implementers uncomfortable questions about money spent. It's audit, social audit, and it's a little more than social audit, and it's really about monitoring. So that could be an example of how one can take a kind of locally generated kind of thing, and these kinds of social audits that I'm talking about have come from frustration, because it's hard to really talk with government. It's hard to hold governments to account, and so through a series of complex historical things, this public citizen hearings have come about. So that could be one example, but I would like to see a lot more of these kinds of examples to be able to speak to kind of contextual ways of thinking. And that's what should go, for example, into the DNA of an evaluation education program. Of course, one should have the best of the West, of the US programs, of what the conventional evaluation processes and impact evaluation now, which is so important, maybe a bit too important, so this is without sacrificing the best of the West, but really sort of focus on this. So that's one thing I wanted to comment, and I was just giving the example of these citizens hearings in India. But I'll also point out that without linkages, and I think this comes to one of the questions which the panelists have been asked to address, the question of linkages between evaluation education and society, citizens, as well as implementers and program designers, right? Typically government, but also including many private players. So what is the nature of forward and backward linkages within which we should locate evaluation education becomes important. So for example, going back to my small example from India about these Jan Sunwais, these citizen hearings, often citizen hearings happen and the implementers go through that uncomfortable kind of process and promise things, but often again things fall back, right? So the forward linkage to how to get things done, again it's back to kind of closed doors government. And so then there is how many citizen hearings can we do, right? How do we actually create kind of evaluative thinking, as a term which was used I think in the chat box as well, or evaluation culture, as a forward linkage to these kinds of innovations such as the citizens hearings. That becomes important. So one of the open questions, I don't know the answer, but I think that a question that we should all collectively think about is that how can an evaluation education program, think of a diploma program of a year or a master's program of 2 years, or the kinds of programs that Mr. Imata was talking about, right? In Japan, they have a long experience of that. So a reasonable length program is what I mean. How can such a program create the forward linkages so that citizens and governments are automatically involved, rather than evaluation education then otherwise becoming a separate technical thing. So I think this means that we have to have a bit more of a holistic perspective and put the demand and supply side. I mean, I think there's a problem with using that kind of language, but it's still helpful to a small extent. So the demand and supply side together to create should come together when we think of evaluation education. I think very often, and that's what we've seen in our little study of many of these global programs, they're overly supply oriented. And so how does one bring in that linkage with citizens and the state, who are ultimately the demanders of these programs, right? And of evaluations. How do we bring that? That's fuzzier, that's harder, but I just want to underline this question. How do we bring that into evaluation education? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suraj. Thank you very much. I think it's very important point that, while we are asked to customize M&E as per the program, as per, the needs, but at the same time, we should not lose the DNA, which contains the local, the factor, the local needs. So thank you very much for bringing this point in the discussion. Let me go to the third panelist, Professor Jae Kwak, who is a professor of international development at the Graduate School of Pacific International Studies, Kyung Hee University. He's the president of Latin American Studies of Korea and the president of the Society for International Development Evaluation. So, Mr. Kwak, you have 10 minutes. Please go ahead.
Okay, I hope I can finish within 10 minutes. Thank you for the invitation in this important venue for discussion on international development evaluation. I'm going to elaborate three things. First, the approaches on the evaluation. Secondly, I'm going to share some of our programs related to international development evaluation. And finally, let me try to answer those two panel questions. First of all, I think there are two different approaches in terms of evaluation. First approach is more traditional approach from the public administration, because evaluation has been basically originating to the government performance evaluation. So, practically speaking, the Department of Public Administration or Department of Political Science or government, they were very much eager to involve in training and exercising the evaluation for government performances. So that's strictly domestic oriented, and it has relatively long history and tradition. That's more like a traditional approach in the monitoring and evaluation techniques, or more focusing on the accountability for their own citizens. Second approach, what we are discussing, is evaluation on development or development project or program or even policy. That involves the international context, because there are donor agencies, there are recipients, partner country, government officials and institutions, and implementers. So this multiple stakeholder system make this evaluation even more complicated. I think in the partner country context, the first approach and second approach can be easily coordinated and synchronized. So for instance, when we discuss on the evaluation in Kenya or Mongolia, there are existing evaluation framework for the government or from the civil society that can be well coordinated with external projects on the particular department or ministries. However, from the donor country perspective, the situation is a little different. That's why we are discussing the issues of supply-oriented courses, because we have to train the future international development experts who will be working mostly on the donor side implementers or NGO activities, whether they are working in Korea or working in the field, in the local level. So the contexts are a little different in terms of based on those two differentiated approaches. We definitely adopt the second approaches in Korea, like many other donors. So we train donor-oriented and supply-oriented training courses for both degree and non-degree level. If you allow me, let me just share my screen a little bit to show what our program is about. Can you allow me to activate my screen sharing?
Production team, can you please help?
Madhuka, can you?
Yes, give me a second.
Okay. Sorry about the delay. The approach we are taking is not from the traditional.
Professor Chair, you can go ahead and share.
Okay. The approach we are taking is not the traditional public administration's approach, but on the international development cooperation approach. Here, the course that I am showing here, I have to find a little bit. This is it. Is the master's program on the international development cooperation at the Kyung Hee University, Korea. This is the largest and longest program in Korea. Basically the program, the master's program is on the international development cooperation. We could get into more details, but if you get into more details, you will have some issues related to the marketability of the students. So general nutshell of the course is generic and general, and we provide the students the opportunity to select the specific tracks. DF stands for Development Finance, M&E stands for Monitoring and Evaluation, and ESD stands for Environmental and Sustainable Development. So with these three specializations, students can take those tracks if they take the selected courses. So they have both international development cooperation degree with the specialized track specializations. So for the M&E courses, we provide monitoring and evaluation, general introduction, and result management for development effectiveness, impact evaluations, social survey methodology, and other research methodologies, and managerial statistics and statistical analysis. Those with the asterisks are more generic, skill-oriented courses, and that can be mixed with other specializations. If you take a look at our courses, especially on compulsories, we emphasize the project cycle management, development econs, and applied economics, along with other sector-oriented knowledge-based programs related to water, climate change, and environment, and also private sector development and international finance, and etc. So those are the options. And then we emphasize the importance of all those knowledges and skills for the students to take to become a professional implementer or consultant or expert in the future. I think this is critically important, those mixed specialization for the students and for the future development experts, because they have to understand what the project development and project management is about, and also they have to learn about the monitoring and evaluation skills so that they can have more balanced approach to the international development as a mostly the practitioner. So this looks like a generic course. However, we try to focus on those particular specializations or tracks, especially on monitoring and evaluation, which is the mostly favored by the students here. And finally, let me just elaborate some answers of the two given questions. How can academic courses promote localized monitoring and evaluation? I think those courses in the donor countries should strengthen the local context of evaluation or local context of development in general. So learning on the partner countries' history, culture, and politics and economic context is critically important. Secondly, usability of such academic courses for the local stakeholders, how we can combine and how we can collaborate each other. I think hiring of local experts, a project implementation team and evaluation team is very, very important. We are increasing the number of local staff and local team members in our project management team. So in the near future, there will be definitely opportunity for us to learning and working together with local experts in the program. And also our program is also international program. There are many international students taking these courses in Korea. So when they go back, they will do more of collaborative works. Finally, let me introduce the one interesting program that recently our government agency has introduced. They have commissioned a little project to the university for the short-term program for strengthening the capacity of future development specialists. So we provide intensive, practically oriented courses for summer vacation. And at the end of the program, there is a practical OJT of the practices of actual evaluation of the project. So students, along with the experts and specialists, they make a team, and they were actually conducted. They conducted the evaluation for such programs. So this was a valuable opportunity for the students to learn not only the theory but also the practicalities. So I hope this kind of combination should be supported, but you need definitely the budget to move on. Okay, that's all I have today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kwak. Thank you very much. Introducing us with the course curriculum that you have, the 3 different dimensions, and also answering the questions that we have posed. So let's move to the question and answer session. And I request participants to type their questions in the chat box. Also, I request the panelists to be brief and precise in their answer. There's already one question for Mr. Katsuji, where the question has been asked from the Mongolian Evaluation Association. Could you please elaborate a bit more about JES training in terms of who are the trainers and trainees? Is the training open to public or only to members? So, Mr. Katsuji, you can reply this question.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. It is open to the public, and then it is actually an entry point for people to become a member of the Japan Evaluation Society. I think the challenge is really the language. I think, of course, it's primarily almost exclusively in Japanese. So it will be open to everybody, but it's not easy for people from international outside of Japan to maybe apply and take. Even though in the online era, I think these days we have some Japanese speaking people taking the course from overseas as well. As far as the trainers are concerned, we have a lineup of usually professors. I do provide an introductory session these days, but professors and some practitioners as well with the specialization in the field to really teach the course and then answer questions from the trainees.
Thank you. Any more questions? Please do write in the chat box. Meanwhile, I think one point that any panelist can respond is that there has been a debate, or rather there has been a discussions, particularly among the practitioners and the users of M&E, that what extent the M&E should be data oriented, captured through MIS systems and through people, through surveyors, etc. And what extent it should be people oriented, basically participating in M&E process by the local people, citizens, and making decisions. So I think it has been, is it still there in particularly in India? A lot of development organizations ask this question. So till the time the participants write their questions here in the chat box, any of the panelists can take up this. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I can go first. Other panelists, I'm sure will have responses as well. To me, this dichotomy of data-oriented versus people-oriented might be a little bit misleading because I think I do appreciate Professor Kwak's presentation about and the two typologies, and then in the second realm, he spoke about the evaluation for in development. And as you may know, of course, the development evaluation has started with the very, very top-down approach where the donors to really make a decision as to the scope of your evaluation and the use of evaluation as well. And people have different perspectives about how much has that have moved, you know, to more like a people-oriented and then, you know, like really thinking about, you know, users and beneficiaries of the different development projects. So I know there are different opinions about that. If you ask me, you know, somewhat progress has been witnessed. I'm also involved in some of the circles in the evaluation professionals, and they really do care about, you know, hearing what people have to say from, you know, from the evaluees, you know, and then, you know, what's happening in the field. So there are popular methods, as you know, is an approach called the participatory evaluation, where people do really have a chance to have a say, not only in the data creation, but also what to make of data and how to use them. So one approach within the participatory evaluation called empowerment evaluation, which is really specialized in that kind of ways of thinking. So that has been somewhat incorporated in the development evaluation as well. So in that sense, what is happening there is, you know, I think the question should be maybe, you know, whose data counts, you know, rather than data versus people, because, and then the approach should be, you know, people's data count as much as other types of data, you know, demography data, geographical data, other data that is aggregated by the UN and the international agencies. So, and I think, you know, because I think that's precisely because the theme of this webinar is very, very important. You know, when we talk about the localization, I think we do need to think about how to really systematically localize the data owned by people and make it visible and available for different kinds of people to use.
Thank you, Mr. Katsuji. I think this is really important that, yeah, how we, you know, we create or generate the data which is owned by people. Therefore, they can use it and make their decisions. Thank you very much. Any other panelists, Dr. Suraj or Dr. Jae, if you can respond to? Thank you.
Professor Kwak, do you want to go?
No, I have no comments. Sorry, go ahead, please.
Okay, I'll just briefly say, I think Mr. Imata said it very beautifully. It is a false kind of dichotomy. If you think data, it's almost as if data is anti-people. So you have to choose between data and people. It's not the case. Whose data counts? I think he said it very beautifully. And I think so there is a need maybe to really democratize data or demystify data. So when data becomes something which is, you know, somebody with highly technical skills only can do this, and it's all about, you know, some statistical nicety and control over that, then as he very rightly said, for decades now we have so many more emancipatory practices towards data. It's just that they're out there. We just have to make sure we bring that in to evaluation education. Participatory evaluation, that itself is of course a broad umbrella. There are so many things beyond in that, right? Feminist evaluation, increasingly now, you know, whatever program we might evaluate, we might want to bring in a feminist perspective, we might want to bring in a human rights perspective, we might want to bring in an environmental perspective, and so on. So for example, a recent evaluation of a watershed program in India took a health rights perspective. It evaluated a watershed program, which is not really directly about health, but from a perspective of how does a watershed program affect health and health distribution among people, right? So there are many ways to play with this beyond the conventional. So I'm just reiterating what Mr. Imata already mentioned.
Thank you, Dr. Suraj. So there's a question by Alex that, and it is for all the panelists, anyone can take up that. How to create the demand for evaluation data from the side of those who are most affected by issues, those who are targeted by the governments and international aid agencies, beneficiaries, or generally the right bearers. Typically, the demands come from the donors, government, and implementers. So anyone, any of you can take up that question.
If I may, I think this is a deep question if you take it in its spirit. And I think a deep answer will be about, we have to think long term. We have to think of creating dialogues in society where people, so accountability, see the term accountability also increasingly has become very narrow. But accountability as a collective, as a society. So it's not, rather than pinning it on one person who is fired, that's a very narrow, maybe corporate view of accountability. So I think what we are really talking about from this question by Alex is really, how do we create those healthy conversations in society about about the collective, about what say government programs or other programs need, and so to create a kind of expansive understanding of accountability, rather than holding somebody very narrowly to account. After all, we are all connected, and so I think those conversations are absent, maybe because we want fast results, right? And it's much easier to hold somebody, to scapegoat somebody as a so I think what I find missing, at least within parts of India that I am familiar with, that kind of broader discussion in society of accountability is missing. I don't know if it answers. It's a deep question. Yeah.
I'd like to echo what Dr. Suraj just mentioned, and I agree that Alex's question is very poignant. I think the point about accountability is definitely important. For the past maybe 20 years, we have been discussing the different kinds of accountability. We have been only talking about upward accountability to donors and governments, but what about the downward accountability? What about the sideways? We have a term called 360 degrees accountability and all that. So, I think the understanding and the consciousness is there, but I think his question is also, how to really make it happen on the ground. And that's a challenge. I think it's, I have seen that kind of challenge both domestically and internationally. And one practical point that I can probably make here is really, have the process owned by the people, by the rights holders. Because if you come to them and then, so this is a program, this is what we're going to do. I would like you to participate, and then, we would like also you to part of the evaluation. They might not really, get on board so easily because they are not really, they don't have a process to be able to say, oh, this is my program too. There's no ownership to begin with. So a way to do it is to really consult with them, or like try to involve with them or engage them from the beginning, from the project formation stage, and talk about the needs and talk about so talk about what they really want out of the program, and then discuss what can be evaluated.
Can you unmute?
What is good for them to really participate, and so involve them from the beginning might make some changes in their attitude about participation in the program and the program evaluation.
Thank you, Mr. Katsuji. Thank you very much. I think it's very important, just sharing just a few weeks back, I was part of a consortium of development organizations, and they were asking very, sensitive questions that it is time to really, they were saying it is time to really, give up the balanced view. They're saying, well, okay, when they say it's the data, basically, I think very rightly you said, it has to be democratized, but Dr. Suraj said, it has to be there for people and let them make the decision rather than somebody else sitting somewhere, either in the national capital or maybe in Washington somewhere making decisions for us. So I think they were very forthcoming saying that let's give up those balanced views. Let's come with the reality, what it has to be. I mean, that's what probably one of the questions that I posed earlier, coming from that. Now, there are voices within the development ecosystem, mostly the practitioners, raising that whose data it is, and I think you raised this question very promptly. So there is a comment from Dr. Aki that yes, the beneficiaries can or should create the evaluation indicators so that the data shall be democratized. I think that's exactly what the members of those development consortium, they were kind of raising or making their comments. So thank you very much. Any more questions here? We still have 4 or 5 minutes left. We can make use of anything that's left out, or we can move towards the end. Okay, so thank you very much for this very useful, very active participation. I hope that the question and answer and the perspective presented by the panelists will be of some benefit for the participants here. Let me invite Mr. Aniruddha Brahmachari for closing remark. Aniruddha is the co-founder and co-leader of Evaluation Community of India. He is the board member of APEA. Aniruddha.
Thank you, Dr. Shyam and Suraj and everybody. It has been a fantastic discussion, and I have been really, I've been quite fascinated with the discussions going on. Just a couple of quick points which I wanted to cover and also link to another initiative we have in APEA. So we were also looking at the national evaluation policies, and we were also looking at the national evaluation frameworks in another strand of our work. And a couple of days back, we actually talked to 15 countries across, and in all the discussion with these 15 Asia Pacific countries, one common strand that really stood out was the capacity, and the capacity in both public and non-governmental sector about monitoring evaluation. And educational courses somehow is so critical in fulfilling that capacity or filling that need capacity which is there out over there. So there, I do understand there are challenges in definition of what is constitutes an evaluation course or what really makes an evaluation course. There are dialogues and discussions around that. But having said that, I just wanted to say that there is that felt need. And when we talk to when I'm talking about 15 countries, it were people from, say, a Niti Aayog in India or a planning commission in Pakistan or Afghanistan, everywhere we talk to, and Kyrgyzstan, also a range of people. That was one thing. Second part, I was also very fascinated with Dr. Suraj presenting, and I think Tashi also, they all mentioned about it. This whole North and South divide about, the educational courses being available. That's an area where we need to pitch in, or maybe we need to work. And that's an area where we can have to make courses which are more contextual to South Asia or Asia Pacific region and rooted to our context, because Asia and Pacific is quite a vast territory with having different contexts playing out. So Pacific is a completely different context than the Central Asian countries context or the South Asian countries context. So we need to look into that and how can we localize in the need. So that discussion around practice, which I think really popped out quite a lot, and the discussion went extensive in that. I think that's a good discussion to have, because whenever we look at from that angle, because the practice is such a big part of M&E education. And there, as much as we have exposed the students or the learners to that practice and the nearer to the field experiences, that would be very much helpful as they go ahead in building a sort of a career in the M&E. The last two sort of points which sort of stood out for me was also when someone mentioned about the marketable, the courses, also the students being marketable. So that is also important. And in nowadays, if the courses are not contextual around marketable, then it becomes very difficult. Why would the student or student or in Asian context family invest in the education or a higher level education of the student or a child, and if the courses are not marketable? The context of being marketable is very important and needs to be understood and needs to be given its due importance. The last point, I think quite a lot of discussion we had and very interesting discussions about, making the whole evaluation piece about people-centric and people holding the center stage. And we had this various trends of data, about types of data, the usability of the data, ownership of the data, and all that discussion. I think that somehow needs to be in the courses which we are building or talking about, or in the practice area we are building. There, this needs to be refocused and re-strengthened, because what is happening is the more the digitization of the M&E area happens, the more people get left out of having a say. So in that whole process, the monitoring processes have become completely digitized. So they are mostly out of the people don't have much say. And going ahead, because the cost and other things, digitization will be the way to go, or things will happen. So the people bringing the monitoring, evaluation, the people making it move as community or people-centric would be a key and holding it to. And if evaluation professionals have that training of being people-centric, I think there will be a much more greater say and use of various methodologies in getting people's views and people's opinions within the whole evaluation and monitoring frameworks and issues. I will stop here, and I think this has been a fantastic discussion, and thank you a lot to all of you for coming in and doing it. Shyam, over to you.
Thank you, Aniruddha. Thank you very much for summarizing the whole discussion beautifully. I think you have brought those points, that yes, we do. I think that there is a time now we need to discuss these things very frequently. There are questions emerging from the bottom, and they need to be answered. They need to be, answered sufficiently, adequately, so that they know what are the benefits for them when M&E exercises are conducted. So I think we need to continue with these debates further, and I really thank Sri Lanka Evaluation Association and APEA for taking that discussion forward. In this series, now we have another webinar on 26 January. The topic is our current journey, processes and results of community-led M&E project in Cambodia and the Philippines. I think that project probably actually takes the question that we have asked today forward. I think it's an example of community-led M&E pilot in Cambodia. So I hope that all of you join. And next, let me just introduce you the journal that APEA has initiated. This is the Asia Pacific Journal of Evaluation. We prefer, that we get these innovative examples, like the one like community-led M&E projects in Cambodia, published in our journals. We would prefer those examples. We also prefer the comparison, between the Asian examples and the examples from Africa or Europe or any part of the world. So we really encourage you to submit the paper to the journals, and again, in the knowledge of this, in the journey of this knowledge sharing, knowledge dissemination, I'll tell you that Asia really doesn't have a mainstream journal on evaluation. After there are Japanese evaluation journal, there is, and so let's recognize that, but we do not have many journals who can take that debate forward, particularly in the Asian context. So I really request all of you to consider and submit the papers. So hereby, I thank all the participants who have come here and attended. I thank all the speakers, the team members of the M&E course curriculum study. I thank all the production team, those who have really helped us to do what we have done just right away, what we have conducted, that very wonderful webinar. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. And we'll see again very soon on 30th webinar in January. Thank you so much.